She died alone in Spain at age 65, far from her fame in Hollywood. That's not even the most shocking part. She tried to kill herself on Christmas Day. There was abuse at the actor's studio, and there was a scandalous clothing malfunction that changed TV forever. Her family just confirmed the truth. From Howard Hughes' strange gifts to her last days in Spain, we're revealing the painful secrets that America's first TV queen died with. Jane Faye Emerson was born in Elizabeth, Louisiana, on July 8, 1917. Lawrence L. Emerson and his wife Emma had 5 children. Her dad ran a ranch and typed up court documents. They were married for a short time. They split up when Faye was 3, which changed the course of her life. After they broke up, she moved around a lot. She moved around a lot in 1924. In Chicago, she lived with her father and stepmother. She moved in with her mother in San Diego, California, when she was 10 years old. This move made things more stable, but problems still existed. Faye went to high school in San Diego at Point Loma. After some time, her mother put her in the Academy of San Luis Rey, a private school run by a Catholic convent in Oceanside. That's where she first realized she loved acting. It was just an interest at the time, but that one spark would change her whole life. She went to San Diego State College for a year after high school. She got interested in local theater while she was in school. She joined the San Diego Community Theater and the St. James Repertory Theater and performed in stock plays with both of them. Even though these early shows were small, they helped her gain confidence and experience. It wasn't easy to become an actor, especially during the Great Depression. She had a hard time making ends meet and had to work hard to follow her dream. Her first play was Russet Mantle, which she did in 1935. For her, it was a simple start, but it was the first step on the path that would soon take her to Hollywood. It was by accident that Faye Emerson got her start in Hollywood, but it changed her life. While she was in a stock theater show in California in 1941, she caught the eye of a Warner Brothers talent scout. At the time, she was still getting used to being an actor after going to San Diego State College. One show got them a deal with Warner Brothers, which was one of the biggest studios at the time. In her early years in Hollywood, she had small parts in movies like Manpower and Blues in the Night, which came out in 1941. Even though these roles were small, they helped her get used to being in front of the camera and learn what the movie business is really like. Warner Brothers was looking for new talent and saw her promise. They gave her more chances to do great things. In the same year, she got bigger parts in Bad Man of Missouri and 9 Lives Are Not Enough. This was the start of her rise in the studio system. She got her first lead part in Lady Gangster, a crime melodrama released in 1942. It was a remake of the 1933 movie Ladies They Talk About, which starred Barbara Stanwyck. She played Dorothy Burton, a bank robber who was caught during a failed escape. They had to deal with betrayals from both other prisoners and old friends when she was sent to jail. The movie showed her battles, how strong she was, and how determined she was to run away when she found out that her old gang was planning to hurt the man she loved. She did something brave when she broke out of jail dressed as the warden. This showed that she was smart as well as tough. Her performance was both strong and vulnerable, showing that she could be the star of a movie. The movie Lady Gangster didn't have a lot of money, but it was a big step in her career. The next year, she was in Air Force, which was one of the most important movies of 1943. The movie Air Force, which was based on real events, was made to boost spirit after the attack on Pearl Harbor. It followed the crew of a B-17 bomber named Mary, and as they flew dangerous missions in the Pacific during World War II. Emerson played Bill Williams' wife, which gave a story that was mostly about war and action, more emotional depth. Even though her part was small, it reminded people of the things families back home do to make adjustments. The movie came out on February 3rd, 1943, and was made with a lot of help from the U.S. Army Air Forces. To make the battle scenes look as real as possible, real planes from Hendricks Army Airfield were used. Reviewers said it had a gripping story, and it became one of Warner Brothers' best military dramas. It was another step toward bigger parts for Emerson. It was in 1944 that she gave one of her best performances in Jean Negulesco's film, More the Mask of Demetrios. The movie, which was based on Eric Ambler's book, was about a mystery writer, Peter Lorre, who became obsessed with finding out about the mysterious criminal Demetrios Makropoulos. Emerson played Irana Previsa, a woman who used to be in love with Demetrios and fell for his charm, but had been deceived and deeply hurt. As the owner of a bar, Irana had seen the bad sides of life. and Emerson made the character seem worn out by the world. Irana felt both attracted to and deeply hurt by her performance, which was based on small facial emotions and body language. She wasn't on TV as much as Sidney Greenstreet, Peter Lorre, or Zachary Scott, but her presence was felt for a long time. Her scenes, which took place in a smoky nightclub, were true to the spirit of classic film noir. They were mysterious, dishonest, and had mixed morals. Faye Emerson never became as well-known as some of her peers, but she made a name for herself with strong, memorable roles. She went from low-budget movies to big-budget movies, and she brought intelligence and depth to every part. Faye Emerson was already famous in Hollywood by the late 1940s, but TV was still a new and unknown medium. It scared most movie stars because they didn't know if it could match the glamour of movies. Emerson had a different view. She started working on TV in 1948 and quickly became one of its first big stars. She did more than just show up on TV. She loved it. As a child, she hosted the show Paris Cavalcade of Fashions, which mixed fashion with entertainment, and she played lead parts in anthology shows like the Chevrolet Teletheater and the Philco Television Playhouse. Even though these shows were still in the experimental phase of TV, Emerson stood out because of her ease and charm. After a year, she did something even better. The Faye Emerson Show began on CBS and then moved to NBC. It was one of the first late-night talk shows and ran until 1952. It helped define the formula long before Johnny Carson or Steve Allen became famous. Emerson's show was more than just conversations with famous people. It had talks about different cultures, letters from viewers, and unexpected moments that kept people interested. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. showed college fencers how to fight with a sword in one of the most talked about scenes. These parts of the show kept it interesting and new. Emerson was making up a talk, not just reading from script. People liked her smarts and charm, but it was her dress choices that made the news. She was known for wearing beautiful dresses that were often cut low. Always beautiful. Some people thought her clothes were too revealing for TV, but they made her stand out. In one famous show, her dress fell during a segment, creating a small scandal that made newspaper gossip columns go crazy. Emerson, on the other hand, never let trouble define her. It showed that TV could be both glamorous and classy because of how she held herself. Even though it was 1950, TV was still very new. According to the census, only 12% of American homes had a TV. This means that her audience was small but important. Most of the people who were watching were wealthy and eager to follow the latest trends. Emerson's appearance made TV seem more important. She was more than just a hostess. She was a real TV star in the beginning. She got the name First Lady of Television because of this. There was more to it than how often she showed up on TV. It was about what she stood for. She set a high bar for TV hosts with her poise and intelligence. She wasn't afraid to talk about important things either. In a 1951 mailbag segment, a viewer said she was wrong to talk about politics on TV. Her answer was clear and strong. It's the business of everyone. These kinds of events showed that she was more than just a pretty face. She wasn't afraid to say what she thought. Because of how she was a great fit for the growing success of game shows. Today's game shows are all about big prizes, but back in the 1950s, they were all about personalities. Emerson became a regular panelist on To Tell the Truth and What's My Line. On these shows, celebrities asked smart questions to try to guess contestants' strange jobs. Emerson was smart and funny at the same time, and he made sharp judgments. She didn't just listen, she took part in the chat, which made people like her. These outings only made her more well-known as one of TV's most versatile stars. In 1951, she tried something new with Faye Emerson's Wonderful Town, a CBS half-hour comedy show that ran until 1952. This show didn't film in a studio. Instead, it went all over the country to show different towns and their cultures. She learned about Boston's long past when she went there. She had a meeting with Senator Hubert Humphrey and performer Richard Carlson in Minneapolis. Some shows even took place outside of the U.S. and showed how people lived in Paris and Mexico City. This structure was big and cost a lot of money, but it gave TV something new to look at. Even though the show was popular, it was hard to keep going because it cost a lot to film on location. But Wonderful Town showed that Emerson wasn't afraid to break the rules. She wasn't just going with the flow. She was putting them. She made important contributions to early television, and in 1960, she was given a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame to honor her work in the field. In the meantime, Faye Emerson's first show on Broadway in 1948 was more than just another part. It was a big change. On April 28th, she took the stage at the Booth Theater in the show The Thing, a comedy written by Ferenc Molnar and translated by P.G. Wodehouse. The fact that it ran for 244 performances shows how well it did. Emerson starred with Lewis Calhoun, who is a seasoned actor with a strong stage personality. The play, which was directed by Gilbert Miller, was a funny story about love, lying, and stage tricks. It was about a playwright's smart attempt to save the relationship between a young couple, using witty dialogue and typical love misunderstandings. It was a big change for Emerson to move from Hollywood to Broadway with this part. She had been known for her good looks and quick-wit in movies during the 1940s, but Broadway wanted something new. It wasn't just about being on screen. It was about skill, time, and performing live, so every second was important. She showed that she was more than just an actor. Her skills were good enough for a New York stage. This launch was even more important because it happened at the right time. It wasn't just her work in movies that made Emerson famous by 1948. Her marriage to Elliott Roosevelt, the son of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, also made her famous. Going to Broadway was more than just an artistic choice. It was a sentence. She was leaving the B-movie parts that had made up most of her early work. She was trying to get more than that. When The Thing plays did well, they opened up new doors. It showed that she could get people to watch her work outside of Hollywood, which set the stage for the next part of her career. She would work on bigger stage projects over the next 10 years. Each one made her look even more like a serious artist. She started an evening with Will Shakespeare in 1953, and it would become one of her most famous shows. It wasn't like any other show. The theater event was meant to show off the best of Shakespeare's work. It included scenes and monologues that showed off both his comedic and serious brilliance. Some of the best stars of the time, like Basil Rathbone and Eva Le Gallienne, worked together on the show. It was a big deal that Emerson was there with them. Already well known for his role as Sherlock Holmes, Rathbone, Le Gallienne was a major figure in American theater. Sharing the stage with such talented artists was hard, but Emerson rose to the task. Her poise and accuracy as she read Shakespeare's words showed that she was more than just a Hollywood star on a short trip to the theater. It was her place to be. The production was more than just an artistic work. It served a greater purpose. The event raised money to help build the Shakespeare Theater in Stratford, Connecticut. Emerson's participation linked her name to a cause that wanted to protect American classical theater. She was committing herself to the stage at a time when TV was quickly changing the way people watched entertainment. Some people paid attention. They said she did a great job and emphasized how she could give Shakespeare's characters meaning and energy. She didn't just read words. She was making them feel new, which showed that she could handle some of the toughest stuff in theater history. Emerson stayed loyal to live performance, even as TV became the most popular way to pass the time. During the 1950s, she kept playing in regional theater with lead roles in shows like Goodbye, My Fancy, and The Vinegar Tree. These parts kept her in touch with audiences outside of Broadway and helped her keep improving her skill. In Goodbye, My Fancy, she played a strong-willed congresswoman who went back to her old school. The play, written by Faye Emerson and turned into a movie in 1951 with Joan Crawford in the lead role. Even so, Emerson brought her own kindness and smarts to the part. People who read the story after the war were hungry for tales about strong women who had to balance personal and work problems. Critics in the area praised her performance, pointing out how much depth she gave to the character. She played a very different part that showed she could do both comedic and dramatic work well. The play was about relationships between family members and love interests, which helped her connect with the audience on a personal level. It showed how versatile she was by showing that she could handle both funny and serious material with ease. These shows in the region were more than just work. During a time when TV was taking people away from live shows, they kept theater alive. A lot of stars were moving to TV, but Emerson stayed true to the stage. She believed in the power of theater and was ready to go to smaller towns and villages to bring great shows to more people. Emerson had made a name for herself as a singer by the end of the 1950s, who would be successful in movies, TV, or the stage. She wasn't just an actor who worked in Hollywood and Broadway. She really knew how to act on stage, and had shown how good she was many times. At the same time, Faye Emerson was a rising star in Hollywood in 1943 when she met Elliott Roosevelt at a party. His father was Franklin D. Roosevelt in office, a colonel in the U.S. Air Force, and Ruth Guggens is his second wife. It wasn't by chance that they met. Howard Hughes set it up. He was a movie producer and aviation magnate who knew how to bring together important and well-known people. It was easy for them to mix beauty and urgency in the middle of World War II, and their relationship quickly turned into something more. He was still married, but that didn't matter. They couldn't hide the spark that was between them. It wasn't long before they were one of the most talked-about couples of the time. After a little more than a year, on December 3rd, 1944, Faye and Elliott got married at the Yavapai viewing station with a view of the Grand Canyon. The setting was dramatic, like something a Hollywood actress would do. The movie Hotel Berlin was still being filmed. The event felt like something from a movie because of the time it happened. Howard Hughes was very important again. He paid for the wedding and even provided planes so that it could happen. This person was 34 years old. She was 27 years old. It was her second marriage and his third. Elliott left for Europe to continue his military service just a few days after they got married. In honor of her, he named his spy plane My Faye, but there was already more space between them. When Elliott came back, they lived with Eleanor Roosevelt at Hyde Park for a while. It was a change from the fancy world of Hollywood to the strict world of politics. But Faye quickly changed. She got along well with Eleanor, who was still First Lady at the time, but she wasn't someone who could just blend in, even though she tried to take on the Roosevelt name. She was independent, driven, and set on continuing her job as an actress. As a Roosevelt daughter-in-law, Faye had to live up to certain standards, but she wasn't ready to give up who she was to do so. It was impossible to ignore how far apart she and Elliott were becoming. By 1947, they were no longer together. It was known that Elliott was cheating on Faye, and she didn't want to quit her job to be the dedicated political wife that everyone else thought she should be. Their fights happened more often. The emotional gap got bigger. A relationship that used to be fun and exciting was now tense because of problems at home and at work. There was something the Roosevelt family didn't like about Faye, and she wasn't going to change to make them happier. It all got too much on Christmas Day, 1948. Faye tried to kill herself by cutting herself on the wrists with a knife. She was taken to Vassar Brothers Hospital in Poughkeepsie right away. There, they fixed her and sent her home 2 days later. In public, she and Elliott both said it was an accident, but people who were close to them knew it wasn't. There was no more love in their marriage. What began as an exciting romance had turned into something painful and strange. In Cuernavaca, Mexico, on January 17, 1950, they got a divorce. Elliott quickly moved on and married again for the fourth time. Faye, on the other hand, focused on her job and moved into television, where she was one of the first people to work in the field. They had been deeply in love during their time together. There was controversy and sadness. They were better off apart than together in the end. Faye Emerson's life was not at all calm. She was already one of TV's biggest stars and was called the First Lady of Television before her third and last marriage. Over the course of the 1950s, she was a regular on talk and game shows. Their wedding took place in Cuernavaca, Mexico, on December 12, 1950. Henderson was a well-known opera conductor and TV band leader. He later became famous as the band leader for The Tonight Show. Hollywood and the music business both paid attention to their wedding because it was such a big deal. Together, they didn't just talk about their private lives. There was work they did together on TV. They were both hosts of the short NBC singing show Faye and Skitch from 1953 to 1954. Each episode lasted 15 minutes. It showed how well they got along with each other on and off screen. They became more famous because of their work together, but the public was always putting pressure on their marriage. Things were not as perfect as they seemed behind the scenes, even though they were seen as a beautiful and successful pair. They were married for 7 years, but in January 1957, they got a divorce. It wasn't easy for them to split up. There were reports that Henderson had been cheating on his wife, and some sources said he was seeing teenage girls. Even though these claims were never proven, they made things more tense during the breakup. The end of the split was in Acapulco, Mexico. It was already clear that Emerson's work was going downhill, but the end of her marriage seemed like the start of a new era. She quit Hollywood and traveled a lot, getting farther away from the entertainment business that made her popular. Emerson had a history of being in trouble before she married Henderson. In 1950, during a live show of the Faye Emerson, she wore a low-cut dress that fell down during the show, showing her chest for a short time on national TV. It was a national issue at the time, and it happened decades before similar things happen all the time. Some people thought it was an intentional attempt to get attention, while others thought it was just a bad mistake. In any case, it was one of the first times in TV history that someone's clothes didn't fit right. She had always worn daring clothes that often went against what was thought to be appropriate for a public woman. Some people admired her choice to wear beautiful, showing gowns, while others didn't like it, because she was willing to go against what people thought. She was a controversial figure. Some people thought she was beautiful and sure of herself, while others said she was too sexy. The wardrobe malfunction made the discussion about what was appropriate on live TV even more heated. It showed how powerful television had become in shaping public opinion. Emerson's ties to important people outside of TV also got her name involved in issues she didn't expect. In 1947, she was involved in a strange way during a Senate review into Howard Hughes' work for the government during the war. The review found that Hughes' press agent bought Emerson nylon stockings for $132. This may not have seemed important at first, but during World War II, nylons were very expensive because they were rationed. Hughes' publicist, John W. Meyer, set the deal. Meyer had also spent thousands of dollars treating military officials and government officials, including Elliott Roosevelt. Emerson was never charged with a crime, but her name was now connected to a much bigger scandal. At the height of her career, Faye Emerson made up to $200,000 a year and was one of TV's biggest stars. But in 1963, after being famous for more than 20 years, she chose to leave. Something different and quieter was what she wanted. The constant media attention, the pressure to always be in the public eye. It had hurt them. As soon as her last TV show was over, she quit Hollywood and went to Europe. The first place she went was Switzerland. Its neutrality and peaceful surroundings made it the perfect place for her to get away from the constant attention she had been getting in America. People in the news had been following her life for years, including her 3 well-known weddings. The freedom she had been looking for came from living abroad. She still went back to the US once in a while, but only for work or the occasional social event. She was ready for an even bigger change by 1975. In Spain, she went to Mallorca and lived in the small village of Daya. Things in Daya were not like in Hollywood. On the cliffs above the Mediterranean, it was a community of artists who valued their work over fame. They lived there as writers, painters, and singers. Emerson liked living a quiet life and mostly kept to herself. She rarely did interviews and didn't show up in public very often. In the town, everyone knew who she was, but she didn't talk much about her past. She had been one of the most well-known TV women. She was just another person who lived in Daya. During these years, she tried to write her autobiography, but failed. Either she had trouble writing her story, or she didn't like how they turned out. No matter what the reason was, the book was never released. It wasn't easy for either to get old. She used to be praised for how beautiful and classy she was. She had to face the fact that she was getting older. When she talked about getting older in a way that wasn't graceful, it was a hint that it was hard for her to let go of the picture that people had of her in the past. But she couldn't get rid of her past. Faye Emerson was a real leader in the late 1940s and early 1950s. She did more than just host talk shows. One of the first women to have her own show was her. From 1949 to 1951, the Faye Emerson show aired on CBS and NBC. This was the early days of TV. About 12% of American homes had a TV, but the people who did watch her brought knowledge and style to their living rooms. She was ahead of her time. Her show, unlike most of the others of the time, talked about important issues. It's not often that you see people talking about women's rights and politics on TV, but she did on her show. She also made it possible for other people to host talk shows. After becoming famous for The Tonight Show, Steve Allen also appeared on her show before he started his own career. Even though she had done a lot, the media often focused on how she looked instead of how talented she was. People knew her for the risky clothes she wore, and sometimes reporters were more interested in her skirts than in what she had to say. It was a difficult truth, but she dealt with it with grace. People who came after her may not have known her name, but her impact lived on. People like Oprah Winfrey and Ellen DeGeneres might not have gone the same way, without her. She was 65 years old when she died on March 9th, 1983. She died in DEA, where she had lived for almost 20 years of stomach cancer. Her house was a renovated stone cottage, and the artists and writers who had become her community lived all around it. People remembered her even though she had left Hollywood. There was news in big publications that she had died, but it didn't get the attention you'd think someone who used to be called the First Lady of television would get. Things had changed on TV by then, and new stars had taken over. But the base she laid stayed put. That night, she showed that TV could be more than just fun. It might be smart, interesting, and make you think. Even when she was old and out of the public eye, she was still a part of that heritage.